There is a photograph that Gabby Petito posted to Instagram on August 12, 2021. She is standing in the Utah desert, smiling into the camera, sunglasses on, the kind of photo that 22-year-old women on road trips take when everything feels adventurous, and the light is good, and the moment feels worth keeping. The caption is cheerful. The location tag is Arches National Park. She looks happy. On that same day, approximately 5 hours before or after that photograph was taken. The exact sequence is unclear. Police officers in Moab, Utah, responded to a 911 call from a witness who said he had seen a man hitting a woman outside a white van in a parking lot near a restaurant. The man was Brian Laundrie. The woman was Gabby Petito. The officers arrived, separated the couple, interviewed them both, and logged the incident as a mental health episode rather than a domestic violence situation. They arranged for Laundrie to spend a night at a local motel. They left Gabby with the van. 15 days later, she was dead. Laundrie killed her in Wyoming on approximately August 27, 2021. The cause of death was blunt force injuries to the head and neck, with manual strangulation. Her body was left in the wilderness of Bridger-Teton National Forest, where it would remain for 3 weeks before it was found. Laundrie drove her van back to Florida, moved back into his parents' house, said nothing to investigators, hired a lawyer, and was found dead in a Florida nature preserve 5 weeks later. A self-inflicted gunshot wound to his head. His confession written in a notebook discovered near his body, when he wrote that she had fallen during a hike and injured herself and was in pain, and he had ended her life to end her suffering. He wrote that it was merciful. Gabby Petito's mother, when she read this, said, "That was his character, even in his last moments. He wanted to make sure he looked like the good guy." This is the complete story of Gabby Petito. The relationship, the trip, the police encounter that was the last chance the system had to intervene, the 3 weeks in the wilderness, the month of silence, the national search that became a cultural conversation about which women get searched for and which women do not, and the questions that remain about what could have been done differently and by whom. Before we go further, if this kind of deeply researched, honest documentary storytelling matters to you, please subscribe to this channel right now. Every single subscriber makes it possible to keep making videos like this one. Hit the button. Now let's go back to the beginning. March 19, 1999. Blue Point, New York, a small community on the south shore of Long Island. Gabrielle Venora Petito is born. She grows up in a large and affectionate extended family. She has 6 younger siblings and half-siblings, in the specific texture of Long Island suburban life that produces children who know their neighbors and spend summers at the beach and grow up with a strong sense of the community they come from. People who knew her as a child describe her as warm and creative, the kind of person who draws people to her, who remembers small things about the people she cares about and checks in on them. She is described consistently by everyone who knew her as the girl who made you feel seen. She was also, from early in her life, someone who cared about things that were happening in the world around her. In 2013, when she was 14 years old, she and her stepbrothers appeared in a music video created to raise awareness about American gun violence in the aftermath of the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting. This is a small detail, but it is characteristic. She was not a passive observer of the world she lived in. She was someone who thought that participation mattered, that her presence and her voice could contribute to something beyond herself. This quality, the belief that showing up, creating, documenting, sharing could be a form of engagement with the world, was what eventually drew her to building a social media presence. She was not trying to become famous for its own sake. She was trying to do something with the specific gift she had, which was the ability to make people feel that they were being spoken to directly, warmly, honestly. In 2017, she graduates from Bayport Blue Point High School in Bayport, New York. At some point during high school, she meets Brian Christopher Laundrie. He is from Roslyn, New York, also Long Island, born in 1997, 2 years older. By the time they graduate, they are together, the kind of high school couple whose relationship seems central and permanent in the way that only early relationships do. They have a specific shared aesthetic: the outdoors, the van life culture that was proliferating on social media in the late 2000s, the idea of a life organized around travel and experience rather than conventional careers. They are, at least in the image they project, and apparently in the image they hold of themselves, compatible. The relationship between Gabby and Brian, as reconstructed from the accounts of people who knew them and from the documentation they left behind during the trip, was characterized by a specific kind of volatility that people who study intimate partner violence recognize. This is not a simple story about an obvious abuser and an obvious victim from the beginning. The relationship had genuine warmth in it, genuine connection, genuine shared interests. The people who knew them both described them as loving each other. The photographs they took together, the posts they made, the content they created, these reflect something real about how they experienced their relationship. And alongside that reality, there was another reality: the volatility, the emotional dysregulation, the name-calling that Gabby asked Brian to stop in a handwritten letter, the incident in Moab, the pattern of behavior that became visible under pressure in a way that the good times concealed. After high school, Gabby worked in North Carolina for a period, as a hostess and in a kitchen in the Wilmington area. She and Brian stayed together across the distance, maintaining the relationship through the period of separation and then reconvening when she returned. By 2021, they were living in Northport, Florida, with Brian's parents, Christopher and Roberta Laundrie, in a house that the Laundries owned. The arrangement is the kind that young couples make when they are saving money and planning something larger. And what Brian and Gabby were planning was the van life trip. A 4-month cross-country journey in a retrofitted 2012 Ford Transit Connect white van, driving from New York to Oregon with stops at national parks, scenic landscapes, roadside monuments, all of it documented on Gabby's Instagram and YouTube channel, where she was building a following as a van life influencer. She was good at it. The social media presence she had built was specific and genuine, not the polished, overly produced content of people who have gone fully professional, but the warmer, more personal stuff of someone who is actually living what she is documenting. Her videos were direct and friendly and showed real personality. She talked to her camera like it was a friend. She had the specific quality of online presence that builds loyal audiences because it feels authentic rather than performed. She wanted to turn it into a career. She wanted the trip to be the content that took her to the next level, the documentation of a 4-month American adventure that would establish her as a serious presence in the van life community. She was 22 years old, and she had a plan, and she was excited about it. The plan was real and worked toward and genuinely meant. They departed on July 2nd, 2021 from Blue Point, New York. They drove across the country, stopping at national parks and photographing themselves in beautiful places and posting the photographs and accumulating the documentation of a life that looked, from the outside, like exactly what they intended it to look like. Two young people in love, seeing America, living freely. The early weeks of the trip documented in Gabby's posts show Arches National Park, Zion National Park, Craters of the Moon National Monument. They show the two of them at scenic overlooks, at desert sunsets, at quirky roadside attractions. They show Gabby laughing, Gabby with her face turned up to the sky, Gabby looking at the camera with the specific quality of ease and warmth that made her social media presence work. They show a van and a road and the infinite American West. They also show things that people who studied the posts after her death noticed. Small things. Attention in some photographs that is visible if you are looking for it. A video from the couple's YouTube channel in which Gabby talks about their relationship difficulties with a brightness that has something else underneath it. When the accumulation of small signs that, considered individually, are ambiguous and, considered together, suggest a pattern. What was happening inside the van was something else. In the FBI files released after the investigation concluded, more than 350 pages of documents including evidence logs, interview records, photographs, and communications. There is a handwritten letter from Gabby to Brian, undated, in which she asks him to stop calling her names. "Just please stop crying and stop calling me names," she wrote, "because we're a team, and I'm here with you." The letter is not a document of a crisis. It is a document of a pattern. The kind of communication that people make when something has happened repeatedly and they are trying to address it in a way that doesn't escalate. The kind of request that is made by people who have learned that direct confrontation produces worse outcomes and are trying to find a softer approach that keeps the peace. She was asking him not to call her names. She was framing the request in terms of their shared identity. They were a team. She was there with him. Because framing it as a shared problem is safer than naming it as his problem. She was 22 years old. She was trying to navigate something that people who study intimate partner violence recognize immediately, and that people without that specific knowledge often read as a communication between two equal partners who are having a disagreement. It is not that. It is the specific language of someone who has learned, through experience, how to make a request for basic decency in a way that is least likely to produce retaliation. The domestic violence advocates who have studied the case have noted the specific dynamics visible in the documentation of the trip. Gabby's social media posts, which were cheerful and public. Her private communications with family and friends, which revealed a different emotional tenor. The witness accounts from people who interacted with them on the road. And the police encounter in Moab, which is the moment at which everything that had been building became publicly visible and legally consequential. August 12, 2021. Moab, Utah, someone calls 911. The caller says he has seen a man slapping a woman outside a white van near a restaurant called Moonflower Community Cooperative. The call is logged. Officers are dispatched. When they arrive, they encounter Brian and Gabby beside the van in a state that both of them are trying to characterize as something less serious than what it is. Gabby is crying. She does not stop crying, as one of the officers notes in his report, for the entire duration of the encounter. She does not compose a full sentence without having to wipe tears or wipe her nose. She is visibly in emotional distress. The body cam footage that was released by the Moab Police Department became one of the most analyzed pieces of evidence in the entire case. Watched millions of times, scrutinized by former law enforcement officers, domestic violence advocates, and ordinary viewers who recognized things in it that the official characterization of the incident did not acknowledge. The footage shows Gabby trying to explain herself in fragmented sentences, visibly struggling with distress that goes beyond the immediate moment. It shows her protecting Brian in her account of what happened. It shows an officer asking her if she was hitting him, and her saying yes, and the officer accepting this as the primary narrative of what had occurred. and it shows the specific way that victims of intimate partner violence often present to law enforcement, in ways that are not optimized for their own protection, that reflexively minimize the behavior of the person causing the harm, that make officers without specific training in recognizing these patterns liable to misread what they are seeing. She tells the officers that she hit Laundrie first. She says this with what appears as a kind of reflexive protectiveness, the specific posture of someone who has learned, over time, that protecting her partner from consequences is the safer choice for her, that the aftermath of an incident in which he is held accountable will be worse for her than the incident itself. The officer notes in his report that Laundrie had grabbed her face and pushed her back. Gabby asks the officers not to separate them. Laundrie, by contrast, is composed. He is calm. He answers questions simply and without apparent distress. He describes Gabby as having an emotional breakdown, as being the source of the conflict. The officers find him credible. They find her distressed and confused. These assessments are accurate in a narrow sense. In a broader sense, they represent a fundamental misreading of which person in that encounter is the danger and which person is in danger. The officers do separate them, briefly. They interview both of them. They assess the situation, and they make the decision that the independent investigator commissioned by the Moab city government would later conclude was the wrong one. They characterize the incident as a mental health episode rather than a domestic violence situation. The significance of this characterization is legal as well as procedural. A domestic violence classification under Utah law would have required an arrest or, at minimum, a citation. A mental health classification requires neither. By calling it a mental health episode, the officers effectively closed the incident without creating the paper trail and the mandatory follow-up that a domestic violence designation would have generated. They separated the couple for the night, Laundrie at a local motel, Gabby in the van, and left them to continue their trip the next day. The 911 caller, who had reported seeing a man slapping a woman, was never interviewed by the officers. His account, which directly contradicted the characterization of the incident as mutual or minor, was not included in any official record. The independent report commissioned after Gabby's death specifically identified this failure to interview the 911 caller as one of the key errors of the encounter. The officers were recommended for probation. The question that hangs over the Moab encounter, that will always hang over it, unanswerable now, is whether a different decision by those officers on August 12th would have changed what happened on August 27th. It is impossible to know. What is known is that this was the last time that an institution with the authority to intervene between Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie had an opportunity to do so, and it did not. And 15 days later, she was dead in the Wyoming wilderness. They continued the trip. They drove north through Utah into Wyoming and into the Grand Teton National Park area, which was one of the planned destinations. The documentation of the trip continued, but at a reduced pace. The posts are sparser in the period following the Moab encounter. The content, where it exists, continues to project the image of the adventure continuing. Scenic photographs, location tags, the visual vocabulary of van life. The private reality, which would only become partially visible after Gabby's death, when investigators examined her phone and her communication with her family and the accounts of people who had interacted with them, was different. The last Instagram post from Gabby's account is from approximately August 25th. The last text message from her phone to her mother was sent on August 30th and said simply, "No service in Yosemite." Her mother did not believe this text was sent by Gabby. The location, Yosemite, was inconsistent with where the couple had been documented as being. They had been in the Wyoming Grand Teton area, not California. And the style of the message, its brevity and its specific content, did not match how Gabby ordinarily communicated with her mother. The message was terse in a way that Gabby's messages were not. Investigators later concluded the text was likely sent by Laundrie in an attempt to establish an alibi and create the impression that Gabby was still alive. He also sent additional texts between the two phones in this period and made a transaction of $700 from Gabby's account to himself with the message, "Goodbye." Activities the FBI concluded were part of a deliberate deception campaign. She was not still alive. By the best estimate of the coroner, she had died on approximately August 27, 2021. 3 days before that text was sent from her phone, 2 days after her last verified social media activity. She died in the wilderness of Wyoming, in a remote camping area in Bridger-Teton National Forest. She was 22 years old. She died in a place she had wanted to see because she loved the mountains and the outdoors and the big landscapes of the American West. She had brought her camera. She had been documenting the trip. She never made it home. On August 29th, according to Laundrie's parents, he called his mother. At the end of the call, his tone completely changed. His father called him back, and Brian said that Gabby was gone and that he might need a lawyer. He gave no further details. He drove the van back to Northport, Florida, arriving at his parents' house on September 1st. Alone, in the van. Without Gabby, without an explanation, without speaking to anyone about where she was or what had happened. This is the sequence that defines Brian Laundrie, not the notebook's self-serving account of mercy. He drove her van home. He went back to the house he had shared with her and his parents. He did not call her family. He did not call the police. He did not report an accident. He did not arrange for a search of the area where he had left her body. He did nothing. For 10 days, from September 1st, when he arrived home, to September 11th, when Gabby's mother filed the missing person report, he was in the house, and Gabby's body was in Wyoming, and he said nothing. 10 days during which her family did not know where she was. 10 days during which, if they had been told where to look, they could have found her. He chose silence for 10 days. Then he chose to vanish. That sequence, the killing, the drive home, the 10 days of silence, the disappearance, is the complete record of who Brian Laundrie was when the structure of an ordinary life was removed and only the choices remained. He was 23 years old. He had been with Gabby since high school. He had planned a 4-month cross-country trip with her, lived with her in a van, shared a bed and a life, and the documentation of that life with millions of people watching. And when it was over, when she was dead, he made every choice available to him in the direction of his own survival, and said nothing about hers. The notebook found in the swamp is not a confession. It is a final act of image management. He wrote the mercy narrative because the mercy narrative is the version in which he is still a person who loved her. The forensic evidence tells the truth that the notebook was designed to obscure. She was beaten. She was strangled. She was left in the Wyoming wilderness. That is what happened. Whatever he wrote in the notebook about her pain and his decision, the physical evidence of her body is the document that cannot be edited. On September 6th, Gabby's mother, Nicole Schmidt, tried to reach her daughter and could not. On September 11th, she filed a missing person report with the Suffolk County Police Department in New York. The same day, Gabby's father, Joseph Petito, went to the Laundrie family home in Northport, trying to get information. The Laundrie family, Christopher, Roberta, and Brian, did not speak to him. They did not respond to him. They had retained a lawyer, and on the lawyer's advice, they would not speak to anyone about Gabby or about Brian or about what had happened. The silence of the Laundrie family generated a response from the public that was immediate and ferocious. In the framework of the investigation, the silence was legally protected. Brian Laundrie had the right to remain silent, and so did his family, and their attorney was providing entirely conventional legal advice in telling them to say nothing to investigators or media. But in the court of public opinion, the silence read as exactly what most people believed it to be: knowledge. The belief, widely held and later supported by the phone call evidence Brian had told his mother on August 29th that Gabby was gone, was that the Laundrie family knew what had happened to Gabby and had made a decision to protect their son rather than help her family find her. Joe Petito made a direct public appeal. "I'm asking for help from the parents of Brian, and I'm asking for the help of the family members and friends of the Laundrie family as well. Whatever you can do to make sure my daughter comes home, I'm asking for that help. There is nothing else that matters to me now." Nicole Schmidt, Gabby's mother, told Brian directly, through the media, "Whatever happened in Wyoming, happened. The only thing you can control is what you do now. Tell us where Gabby is. You tarnish your love for her with your silence." Neither appeal produced any response. On September 15th, the Northport Police Chief Todd Garrison said publicly at a press conference, "All I'm going to say is we know where Brian Laundrie is at." The police had been surveilling the Laundrie home and had, they believed, seen Laundrie return to the house on September 15th. They had not. They had mistaken Laundrie's mother, Roberta, for Brian as she exited a car and entered the house, a mistake that has been studied as a significant operational failure in the surveillance operation. 2 days later, on September 17th, the Laundrie family reported Brian missing. They said they had not seen him since September 13th, when he left the house with a backpack saying he was going hiking in a local nature preserve. The police, when they received this report, realized they had missed him. He had been gone for 4 days before anyone outside the family knew he was gone. The search for Gabby was already generating extraordinary public attention by this point. The combination of factors, the van life documentation that had made Gabby a public figure, the body cam footage from the Moab encounter that had been released and that was being analyzed on social media in minute detail, the silence of the Laundrie family, the genuine mystery of a young woman's whereabouts, created a media environment unlike anything that had previously accompanied a missing person case. The body cam footage, once released, became one of the most viewed pieces of police body cam footage in American history. People watched it repeatedly, analyzing the specific dynamics of the encounter, reading Gabby's body language and Brian's body language and the officers' responses. Domestic violence advocates and former law enforcement officers appeared on television to explain what they saw. True crime podcasters dedicated episodes to it. Social media threads with hundreds of thousands of engagements broke down the footage frame by frame. The Moab Police Department received a volume of public attention that small municipal departments essentially never receive, and it was universally critical. Social media sleuths were analyzing every photograph and video from the trip, constructing detailed timelines, identifying locations from background details in photographs, tracking the couple's route based on the geotags of their posts. Some of this analysis was genuinely useful. Investigators acknowledged that public tips based on social media analysis helped identify locations and narrow the search area. Some of it was harmful. Specific individuals were falsely identified as potential suspects and subjected to harassment and death threats. A couple who had given Gabby and Brian a ride in their van near the beginning of the trip became subjects of suspicion and received threatening messages before investigators cleared them publicly. The case was the lead story on every major American news outlet every day for weeks. Former FBI agents were appearing on cable news. Commentators and analysts and advocates were offering interpretations of every new piece of information as it emerged. The country was watching. And in the middle of all of it, Gabby Petito's parents were searching for their daughter. On September 17th, the same day that the Laundrie family reported Brian missing, the FBI opened a formal investigation. The Bureau organized a search of the remote Wyoming areas where the couple had last been documented. On September 19th, search teams located human remains in the Spread Creek dispersed camping area, a remote site within Bridger Teton National Forest, near the boundary of Grand Teton National Park. The remains were subsequently identified as those of Gabby Petito. She had been in the wilderness for approximately 3 to 4 weeks. The discovery, when it was announced, generated a response from the public that is difficult to describe without using the language of grief, which is complicated when the grief belongs to people who did not know the person they are grieving for personally. But Gabby Petito had, through her social media presence and the weeks of national attention, become someone that a significant portion of the public had developed a feeling of knowing. And the news that she had been found dead, and had been dead for weeks, and had been lying in the Wyoming wilderness for 3 to 4 weeks, while the country searched for her and her parents made public appeals, and her fiancé sat in his parents' house. That news produced something that functioned like collective grief in a way that is not entirely explicable by the rational analysis of what the relationship between a true crime audience and a victim actually is. The autopsy was conducted by the Teton County Coroner's Office. The initial finding described blunt force injuries. The final autopsy, confirmed in October 2021, determined the cause of death was blunt force injuries to the head and neck, with manual strangulation. The manner of death was homicide. She had been beaten and strangled. She was 22 years old. The coroner estimated that her body had been in the wilderness for 3 to 4 weeks before it was found. She had died, approximately, on August 27, 2021. Her body had lain in the wilderness of Wyoming for 3 to 4 weeks, approximately, while her fiancé drove her van home, moved back into his parents' house, watched the national search for her on television, hired a lawyer, and said nothing. The search for Brian Laundrie began in earnest after the discovery of Gabby's body and the confirmation of homicide. He had been named a person of interest from the beginning of the missing person investigation, and a federal arrest warrant had been issued. Not for murder, because the FBI had not yet established sufficient evidence to charge him with murder, but for the unauthorized use of Gabby's Capital One debit card after her death, which he had used to withdraw more than $1,000. The charge was a means of generating a warrant that would allow law enforcement to detain him if they found him. The public reaction to Laundrie's silence and the Laundrie family's silence was, by any measure, extraordinary. Joe Petito, Gabby's father, had gone to the Laundrie family home directly and knocked on the door and received no response. He spoke publicly on television in terms that were as close to a direct appeal as a grieving father can make. "Whatever you can do to make sure my daughter comes home, I'm asking for that help. There is nothing else that matters to me now." The Laundrie family's attorney issued a statement expressing hope that the search for Gabby would be successful and that she would be reunited with her family. At the time the statement was issued, Brian Laundrie was in his parents' house. At the time the statement was issued, Brian Laundrie had told his mother on August 29th that Gabby was gone and that he might need a lawyer. The statement was issued on behalf of a family that had been told their son's fiancé was dead, and the statement expressed hope for her safe return. Northport Police Chief Todd Garrison made his most confusing public statement on September 15th, saying he knew where Brian was, apparently believing the surveillance had confirmed his presence in the house. The police had mistaken Roberta Laundrie for her son as she exited a car. 2 days later, the family reported him missing. The police, reviewing their surveillance footage, realized the error. He had been gone for 4 days, and they had not known it. They searched the Carlton Reserve, a 24,000-acre nature preserve and environmental park near the Laundrie family home in Northport, where Brian had told his parents he was going hiking. They searched for weeks. The terrain was difficult, swampy in places, flooding in others following recent heavy rainfall. On September 15th, Brian Laundrie's Ford Mustang was recovered from a parking area adjacent to the reserve. His presence there was confirmed. His body was not found. The search continued. Brian Laundrie was not found. On October 20th, 2021, with his parents present and assisting in the search, investigators found partial human remains in the Myakkahatchee Creek Environmental Park near Northport, in an area that had been submerged during previous searches. Near the remains, a backpack, a notebook, and a revolver. The remains were subsequently confirmed by the FBI to be those of Brian Laundrie. A Florida medical examiner determined the cause of death was a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He had been dead, based on the state of the remains, for some time before he was found. He had shot himself. The notebook was wet from the flooding that had submerged the area. Investigators worked to preserve and read its contents. On January 21, 2022, the FBI formally announced the conclusion of its investigation. FBI Denver Special Agent in Charge Michael Schneider stated, "A review of the notebook revealed written statements by Mr. Laundrie claiming responsibility for Miss Petito's death. The notebook's full contents were not released publicly. What was released later through the FBI's document disclosure were excerpts in which Laundrie described the night of Gabby's death. He wrote that she had fallen during a hike, badly injuring her head. He wrote that she was gasping in pain and begging for an end to her pain. He wrote, 'I don't know the extent of Gabby's injuries, only that she was in extreme pain. I ended her life. I thought it was merciful, that it is what she wanted, but I see now all the mistakes I made.' He wrote that from the moment he made the decision, he knew he could not go on without her. On the last page recovered, 'I have killed myself by this creek in the hopes that animals may tear me apart, that it may make some of her family happy.' The notebook entries describe a mercy killing. The forensic evidence, blunt force injuries to the head and neck, manual strangulation, describes something else. A fall that badly injures someone's head does not produce manual strangulation marks. The physical evidence of Gabby Petito's death is the evidence of someone who was killed by another person's hands, not of someone whose death was an act of mercy in response to an injury. Gabby Petito's mother read the notebook entries and said what she said. That was his character, even in his last moments. He wanted to make sure he looked like the good guy. The autopsy was clear. Blunt force injuries to the head and neck, with manual strangulation. She had been beaten. She had been strangled. She had been left in the wilderness. The notebook is a document of who Brian Laundrie was in his final moments. Someone constructing a narrative that made himself the hero of the story he had ended. The forensic evidence is a document of who he actually was. Gabby Petito's father, Joe Petito, said in response to the FBI's final statement, "The quality and quantity of the facts and information collected by the FBI leave no doubt that Brian Laundrie murdered Gabby. The investigation found no other individuals directly involved in Gabby Petito's death. The FBI confirmed that Laundrie had been sending text messages from Gabby's phone after her death, attempting to deceive law enforcement and family members into believing she was still alive. He had also made a transaction of $700 from Gabby's account to himself, with the message, "Goodbye," in what investigators believed was another attempt to construct an alibi. He had done all of this, killed her, left her body, driven her van home, moved back into his parents' house, refused to speak with police, hired a lawyer. She watched her family search for her on national television, and then, on September 13th, walked out of his parents' house with a backpack and gone to a swamp in a Florida nature preserve and shot himself. What happened to Brian Laundrie's parents? Christopher and Roberta Laundrie were never charged with any crime, despite Gabby's family's belief that they had knowledge of what had happened, based on Brian's phone call to his mother on August 29th saying that Gabby's gone and that he might need a lawyer. No criminal charges were filed against them. The decision not to charge them was made by prosecutors who concluded that the available evidence was insufficient to establish criminal liability. The phone call in which Brian said Gabby was gone and he might need a lawyer is ambiguous enough, in isolation, that prosecutors could not establish beyond a reasonable doubt that it constituted prior knowledge of a homicide rather than knowledge of an accident or an unresolved situation. Whether Christopher and Roberta Laundrie knew, when their son came home alone in Gabby's van in early September, that Gabby was dead, and whether that knowledge, if they had it, constituted a crime under Florida law, was a question that the evidence did not resolve to the satisfaction of prosecutors. What they knew, and when they knew it, remains officially undetermined. What is established is that when Gabby's parents and law enforcement came to their door, they said nothing. Whatever else that silence was, it allowed the search for Gabby and the search for Brian to proceed in the absence of the information that the family possessed. In February 2024, Gabby's parents, Nicole Schmidt and Joseph Petito, reached an undisclosed settlement in a civil lawsuit against Roberta and Christopher Laundrie. The terms were not disclosed. In November 2022, a judge had awarded $3 million to Nicole Schmidt as administrator of Gabby's estate in a wrongful death lawsuit against the estate of Brian Laundrie. No amount of money is sufficient to compensate the Petito family for the loss of their daughter Gabby at the hands of Brian Laundrie, their attorney said. The Petito family lost their daughter, and they were also denied the opportunity to confront her killer. That denial, the specific grief of not being able to face the person who killed your child, of not being able to ask why, of having to absorb the confession in a notebook found in a swamp rather than in a courtroom, is one of the lasting dimensions of the case for the people who loved her. The case became, in ways that were both useful and painful for the people at its center, a national conversation about something much larger than the specific story of Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie. It became a conversation about missing white women, about the specific and measurable disparity in media attention devoted to missing white women compared to missing women of color, compared to missing indigenous women, compared to missing people of any description who do not fit the specific demographic profile that generates national cable news coverage and social media obsession. Advocates and journalists pointed out, during the weeks of saturation coverage of the Gabby Petito search, that hundreds of other people, disproportionately women of color, disproportionately indigenous women, were also missing in America at that moment, and were receiving approximately no coverage. Wyoming, where Gabby's body was found, has one of the highest per capita rates of missing and murdered indigenous women in the United States. The National Crime Information Center has documented that Indigenous women go missing at rates more than twice the national average for all women. In September 2021, as the Gabby Petito search dominated every major media outlet, a significant number of Indigenous women were listed as missing in the exact same geographic region where the Gabby Petito search was taking place. They were not on the front page of the New York Times. They were not the subject of wall-to-wall cable news coverage. They were not generating viral social media threads of amateur sleuths analyzing their Instagram posts for clues. The phrase, "missing white woman syndrome," which journalist Gwen Ifill had coined years earlier, was used in thousands of articles and social media posts in September 2021. The conversation was necessary and important and long overdue. It was a conversation that Gabby Petito's own family did not initiate and did not deserve to be made responsible for, and navigating it while simultaneously searching for their missing daughter and then processing her death was an additional weight on top of an already unbearable one. Her father, Joe Petito, responded to it in a way that was both principled and deeply personal. He said that he hoped the attention given to Gabby's case would translate into attention for everyone, that the coverage would be the beginning of more coverage rather than a replacement of coverage of others. He launched the Gabby Petito Foundation, which focuses on domestic violence awareness and support, funding shelters and advocacy organizations for victims of intimate partner violence across the country. He said, of the attention, "There wasn't a demographic or race or country for that matter that didn't help us, and so we are going to try to do the same and give that back." The foundation has continued to operate and expand since her death, supporting organizations that provide resources to domestic violence victims and their families, and working to prevent the kind of intimate partner violence that took Gabby's life. The social media sleuthing that characterized the Gabby Petito search has its own complicated legacy. On one hand, social media tips and the collective attention of millions of people genuinely aided the search. The sheer volume of information generated by people analyzing her posts and video footage and location tags created leads that professional investigators pursued. On the other hand, the social media phenomenon also produced significant misinformation, harassment of people who were falsely identified as suspects, and a general atmosphere of public participation in a criminal investigation that sometimes interfered with, rather than supported, the official investigation. The question of what role crowdsourced investigation should play in missing person and homicide cases is one that the Gabby Petito case brought into sharper focus than any previous case, and it has not been fully answered. The domestic violence dimension of the case, visible in the Moab police encounter, visible in the letter she wrote asking Brian to stop calling her names, visible in the witness accounts from people who observed the couple during the trip, is one of the most important and most underreported aspects of the story. The case is often discussed in terms of the mystery, the social media phenomenon, the missing white woman conversation, the notebook, the swamp in Florida. It is less often discussed in terms of what it revealed about the specific dynamics of intimate partner violence, chat about how those dynamics present to outside observers and to law enforcement, and about what it means when the official systems charged with protecting people make the kinds of errors that the Moab officers made on August 12th. The statistics on intimate partner violence in the United States are not abstract in the context of this case. Approximately 1 in 4 women in the United States will experience severe physical violence at the hands of an intimate partner in their lifetime. On average, more than 3 women per day are killed by intimate partners in the United States. The majority of victims know their killers. The majority of homicides involving female victims involve intimate partners. These statistics describe a specific and ongoing public health crisis that the Gabby Petito case brought temporarily to the center of a national conversation, and that receded from that center as the story itself receded, and that continues to produce the same outcomes for the same structural reasons, regardless of who is or is not paying attention. The specific failure in Moab, the failure to classify the incident as domestic violence, the failure to interview the 911 caller, the characterization of a visibly distressed woman as the source of the conflict rather than as a person in danger, is not an aberration. It is a documented pattern. Research on law enforcement responses to domestic violence calls has consistently found that officers without specific training in recognizing the dynamics of intimate partner violence misread the situations they encounter, that victims' behavior in the presence of police often does not correspond to what non-trained observers expect victim behavior to look like, and that the protective behaviors victims display, minimizing the incident, claiming responsibility, asking that the partner not be separated, are frequently taken at face value rather than understood as the specific behavioral products of living in an abusive relationship. Those errors, documented and acknowledged by an independent investigation, did not cause Gabby Petito's death in any direct or simple sense. Brian Laundrie killed her. He made the choice to kill her, and he made the choice to drive her van back to Florida and say nothing and let her family search for her. The responsibility for her death is his, but the Moab encounter represents, in the clearest possible terms, a moment at which the system had an opportunity to intervene and did not, and a woman died 15 days later. That matters. It matters for how we train officers to recognize the dynamics of intimate partner violence. It matters for how we understand the legal frameworks governing mandatory responses to domestic violence calls. It matters for every woman who is currently in a situation like Gabby's and who needs the systems around her to be better than the ones that failed her. Gabby Petito was 22 years old. She grew up in Blue Point, New York. She loved the outdoors, and she loved documenting her experiences, and she wanted to build a life as a content creator, and she was good enough at it that the ambition was plausible. She was engaged to be married. She was on the trip of her life, 4 months across America in a white van, and she was filming it, and the photographs were beautiful, and she looked happy in them. She was not always happy. The letter asking him to stop calling her names, the crying on the side of the road in Moab that did not stop for the entire duration of the police encounter. The private communications with her family that revealed a different emotional texture than the public posts. These things coexisted with the genuine joy, the genuine adventure, the genuine love of the landscape, and the freedom of the road. People in difficult relationships often love the person they are with, often experience genuine good moments alongside the bad ones, often post the photographs from the good moments because those are the moments they want to remember and the moments they want to share. This is not dishonesty. It is the specific complexity of being in a relationship that is both real and harmful simultaneously. Gabby's public presence, the warmth of her videos, the directness of her communication with her audience, the specific quality of being able to make the person watching feel like they are being addressed personally, was not a performance. The warmth was real. The joy in the landscapes was real. The excitement about the trip and the plan and the channel was real. These are not things that are canceled by what was also happening. They coexisted. She was a real, full person who was both genuinely happy in some moments and in genuine danger in others, and the story of her death is not served by collapsing that complexity into a simpler narrative. After she was gone, the people who had followed her channel and her Instagram wrote about her in the language of people who feel they have lost someone they actually knew. They had not known her. They had known the version of her that the camera showed. But the grief was genuine, in the specific way that grief for public figures is genuine when the public figure had the quality of authentic presence that makes the audience feel seen. She had that quality. She had made people feel that she was actually talking to them. And then she was gone, and all they had left was the record she had made of a trip that had ended with her body in the Wyoming wilderness. She asked him to stop calling her names because they were a team, and she was there with him. She was trying to hold it together. She was 22 years old, and she was trying to hold it together in Wyoming in a white van, and she did not survive the attempt. She deserved to survive. She deserved to come home. She deserved to build the channel and the career she was working toward, and to find out what her 20s and 30s and 40s and the rest of her life would bring. She deserved all of it, and she was gone on approximately August 27th, 2021, in a wilderness she had wanted to see, killed by the man who had told her she was his teammate. The Gabby Petito Foundation is at gabbypetitofoundation.org. It exists because her father, in his grief, decided to do something with it. If this case moved you, and if the issue of domestic violence is something you want to support, please consider looking them up. And please subscribe to this channel. The work of telling these stories honestly and completely is only possible because people like you make it possible. Hit the button. Her name was Gabrielle Venora Petito. She was born on March 19, 1999 in Blue Point, New York. She loved the road and the mountains and the big sky of the American West. She wanted to be a content creator who documented a life of travel and adventure and shared it with people who wanted to see the world through her eyes. She was good enough at it that the ambition was not a fantasy. She was 22 years old, and she had a plan, and she was executing it, and she was on a 4-month cross-country trip in a white van, and the photographs were beautiful, and the landscapes were extraordinary, and she did not make it home. She deserved so much more than what she got. She deserved to come home from the trip. She deserved to post the best photographs and build the audience and find out what the channel became. She deserved to be 23 and 30 and 50 and old. She deserved to find out who she would become. Netflix released a 3-part documentary series called American Murder, Gabby Petito in February 2025, which included text messages, video footage, personal journals, and new interviews with members of her family. The documentary reached a new generation of viewers who had either been too young to follow the case in real time or who had encountered it only in fragments. It generated renewed public discussion about the case, about intimate partner violence, and about the specific way in which Gabby Petito's story became a lens through which a much larger set of issues briefly came into focus. The documentary was, by streaming metrics, one of Netflix's most watched releases in the week of its debut. The Gabby Petito Foundation was created by her family in her memory. It provides funding for domestic violence awareness programs, shelters, and advocacy organizations across the country. It exists because her father decided that if the country was going to pay attention to his daughter's death, he was going to try to make that attention matter. If you want to do something with what this documentary made you feel, the foundation is at gabbypetitofoundation.org. Every donation, every share, every hour of attention directed toward the broader issue of intimate partner violence in America is a continuation of what Joe Petito tried to begin. Please subscribe to this channel. This kind of storytelling, honest, documented, complete, is only possible because people like you make it possible. Her name was Gabrielle Venora Petito. She was 22 years old. Remember her for who she was, not just for how she died.